Okay, we're going to do a pre-trip inspection here. This is a pre-trip inspection that goes along with the guidelines set forth by the DMV on the items and things that need to be inspected in order to pass your CDL pre-trip examination. So there's going to be some things that are not going to be called out that would normally be inspected on a normal pre-trip inspection if you were driving your truck and inspecting your truck on a daily basis. So just because these things are not called out for test purposes doesn't mean that they're not important to do once you get out of school when you start driving your own truck. An example of that would be the in-cab inspection doesn't require you to talk about things above your head that's going to fall, make sure everything's secured in the truck, that there's nothing in the floor that's going to roll around and impede your ability to drive. Although those things are important, they're not included on the CDL pre-trip examination. So bear with me and we'll get through this pre-trip inspection, and I'm going to show you the things that you need to inspect and the defects and the information that we need to know about those items. Okay, so we're going to start right here in the front of the truck. And the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at our lights on the truck. The three lights in the middle are the identification lights. The two lights on the outside are clearance lights. They're properly mine secured. They're amber in color. They're not cracked or broken. We're going to drop down and look at our headlights and our pet lights, which is parking, emergency, and turn signals. The headlights, the high beam and low beam, are properly mine secured. They're not cracked or broken. They're clean. The pet lights are orange in color. They're not cracked or broken. They're properly mine secured. And that's going to encompass both sides of the truck, the driver's side and the passenger side. From that point, we're going to look down underneath the engine compartment and make sure that we don't see any excessive leaks underneath the engine compartment. Okay, on the passenger side of the engine compartment, we're going to do an overall view of the engine compartment. We're going to check the engine block, make sure we don't see any excessive leaks on the engine block. We're looking at all of our hoses to make sure that there's no abrasion bulges or cuts in the hoses. There's no signs of leaks and all the clamps are in place. We're looking at any wiring harnesses we see on this side of the truck to make sure we don't see any frayed wires or loose wire connections. Then we're going to move to the coolant reservoir. We're going to inspect that reservoir to make sure it's properly mine secured. There's no signs of leaks. It's filled to the proper level and the cap is in place. We're going to drop down to our alternator. On the front of the alternator is the jam nut. We're going to make sure it's properly mine secured. We're going to check our belt to make sure that there's no more than 3/4 inch play in the belt and it's not cracked or dry rotted. We're going to check the alternator itself to make sure that it's not missing any nuts or bolts. There's no signs of damage to it. The wires are properly connected, no loose wire connectors or any frayed wires. We're going to drop right down below the alternator to the water pump. Make sure that the water pump's properly mine secured. There's no signs of leaks to it. We're going to check the water belt pump or the water pump belt to make sure there's no more than 3/4 inch play in the belt. It's not cracked or dry rotted. Then we're going to move back to the exhaust system. We're going to check our turbos and the exhaust to make sure we don't have any oil leaks on the turbos and no signs of exhaust leaks on the exhaust pipe. On the driver's side of the engine, we're going to do the same thing we did on the passenger side. We're going to do an overall view of the engine compartment. We're going to make sure that there's no excessive leaks from the engine block. We're going to look at all of our hoses, make sure there's no abrasion bulges or cuts in any of our hoses and all the clamps are in place, no signs of leaks. We're looking at all of our wiring harnesses to make sure we don't see any frayed wires or loose wire connectors. Then on the driver's side of the engine, we're specifically going to inspect our power steering reservoir. We're going to make sure it's filled to the proper level, there's no signs of leaks, and the reservoir is properly mine secured. We're going to specifically check the power steering hoses to make sure that there's no abrasion bulges or cuts in the hoses, there's no signs of leaks, and all the clamps are in place. We're going to come to our air compressor. It's an internally driven air compressor. There's no belt. We're going to make sure it's properly mine secured with no signs of damage, no missing hardware, and there's no signs of oil leaks. We're going to check the engine oil level. We're going to pull that dipstick out, wipe it clean, stick it back in, pull it out again, make sure it's in between the add and the fill, and If we do have to add oil to it, we're going to add oil right here, and oil is measured in gallons and not quarts. From there, we're going to move to the steering linkage. We're going to start with our steering rod. It's not bent, cracked, or broken. It's properly mine secured. The steering knuckle is properly mine secured and lubricated. This is a sealed unit, so there's no way to lubricate this one. We're going to check our steering gearbox. It's properly mine secured. It's not missing any nuts or bolts, and there's no signs of leaks. From the steering gearbox, we're going to drop down and we're going to check our steering linkage. We're going to start with our front pitman arm. We're going to look at our drag link, our rear pitman arm, and back behind the axle is the tie rod. We're going to make sure all those items are properly mine secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. We're going to make sure we're not missing any types of nuts. Our castle nuts and cotter pins are in place, and everything is properly mine secured with no signs of excessive wear. We're checking our front suspension. We're checking our control arm mount. It's properly mine secured, not missing any nuts or bolts. The control arm is properly mine secured, no signs of damage, not bent or twisted. The U-bolts are properly mine secured, no signs of looseness on the nuts. The shock absorber is properly mine secured, top and bottom, no signs of leaks. The airbag is properly mine secured, no signs of leaks, no abrasion, bulges, or cuts or drive rot, properly mine secured, top and bottom. We're going to check our brake lines to make sure they're properly mine secured, no abrasion, bulges, or cuts, no signs of leaks. That brake line leads to a brake chamber. Make sure that brake chamber has no signs of damage, not missing any nuts or bolts, is properly mine secured. Our push rod and our slack adjuster is properly mine secured, not missing any pins or keys, no more than 1 inch free travel. On the inside of the brake drum, we're checking the brake drum to make sure there's no damage to the brake drum. There's no signs of oil or grease, no illegal welds to the brake drum. The brake pads are a 1/4 inch thick. They're square, not rounded. They're not cracked or broken. All right, from there, we're going to move to the tire assembly. The front wheel, we're going to check the inner and outer sidewalls to make sure there's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts, no signs of damage, and that the tires are properly beaded to the rim. On the tread depth, we're going to make sure that we have 4/32 tread depth, even tread wear, and virgin tires on the front axles. Our lug nuts, we're going to make sure all of our lug nuts are properly mine secured. They're in place. There's no shiny threads or rust trails from the lug nuts that would indicate looseness. The only way to check these for proper tightness is with a DOT or a commercial lug wrench. We're going to check our hub seal to make sure it's properly mine secured with no signs of leaks. This is a sealed unit, so there's no way to check the fluid in it. That has to be checked when it goes in for service. We're going to find our valve stem, and we'll make sure our valve stem is properly mine secured with no damage. The cap is in place. The valve stem should be an indicator that we need to check the tire pressure in this tire, and the tire pressure should be inflated to the manufacturer's recommendation, which is on the side of the tire. We're going to check our driver's side mirror to make sure it's properly mine secured. The glass is clean, it's not cracked or broken. The door latch works properly. We're checking the door hinges to make sure they're properly mine secured, they're not loose. We're going to lift up and down on that door to make sure those hinges are tight. We're looking at the weather trim around the door to make sure it's in good shape, no abrasion, bulges, or cuts, not dry rotted. We're checking our steps to make sure there's nothing here that's going to cause a slip, trip, and fall. There's no missing nuts or bolts, no signs of damage. Our driver's side turn signal 4-way flasher is orange in color. It's not cracked or broken. Properly mine secured. We come back to our dog box. Make sure that the door is properly mine secured. The weather trim is in good condition. No signs of dry rot. We're going to make sure we have 3 reflective triangles. We've got a 5 BC fire extinguisher for regular commodity, 10 BC for hazmat. We've got spare electrical fuses. We're going to check our fuel tank. Make sure there's no damage to the fuel tank. There's no signs of fuel leaks. The straps are properly mine secured with rubber gaskets, no metal to metal. The fuel cap is in place. The seal on the inside of the fuel cap is in good condition, and the T-bar and chain is present. At the back of the cab, we're going to start at the top and work our way down. We're going to make sure our DOT reflective tape is clean and present. We're going to check our vertical exhaust stack to make sure it's properly mined secure with no missing nuts or bolts, no signs of damage or exhaust leaks. Our exhaust mount is properly mined secure with no damage, no missing nuts or bolts. We're going to check our tractor protection valve to make sure it's properly mined secured and that the emergency line and the service lines are properly connected. We're going to check the emergency and service air lines for abrasion, bulges, or cuts or any signs of leaks. We're going to make sure they're not dragging on the frame rails of the truck. We're going to check our electrical line to make sure there's no signs of frayed wires, that it is also not dragging on the frame of the truck. We're going to follow them over to the headboard of the trailer. We're going to check our glad hands to make sure they're properly mined secured, that the grommets are in good condition. We're going to check our electrical pigtail to make sure that there's 7 pins for 7 holes, there's no signs of corrosion, and that the pigtail's properly secured. We're going to check our steps and our catwalk to make sure that they're properly mined secured, nothing that's going to cause a slip, trip, and fall. We're going to look at our frame rails on both sides, as well as our cross members, to make sure they're properly mined secured, they're not missing any nuts or bolts, they're not bent or twisted, no illegal welds on either one of those items. We're going to check our drive shaft to make sure it's not bent or twisted, that the universal joints are tight and properly lubricated. There's a universal joint at the rear and a universal joint at the front of the drive shaft that needs to be inspected. We're going to turn right around. We're going to check our splash guard to make sure that our splash guard is properly mined secured, no signs of damage, no missing nuts or bolts. We're going to look underneath here. Every system or every axle has 3 systems on it, has to be inspected. As we did on the front axle, every axle from there on has a brake system, a suspension system, and a wheel and tire assembly. So here we're going to inspect the brake system. We're going to check our air lines to make sure that they're properly mined secured, there's no abrasion, bulges, or cuts. We're going to check our brake chamber. There's no signs of damage, there's no missing nuts or bolts, it's properly mined secured. On the back side of every brake chamber is a push rod and slack adjuster. There's no signs of damage to that push rod and slack adjuster. It's not missing any pins or keys. There's no more than one inch free travel in that slack adjuster. Again, the brakes are covered with dust covers, but that does not relieve you of your responsibility to identify and inspect. So we're looking at the brake pads again to make sure that they're at least a 1/4 inch thick. They're square, not rounded. They're not cracked or broken. The brake drum has no illegal welds, not damaged, no oil or grease in the brake drum. From the brake system, we're going to go to the suspension system. We're going to check our control arm mount. That leads to a control arm. That leads to 2 U-bolts. That leads to a shock absorber. That leads to an airbag. All of these items are inspected exactly as the front axle was. The control arm mount is properly mined secured, it's not missing any nuts or bolts. The control arms are properly mined secured, not damaged, bent, or twisted. The U-bolts are properly mined secured with no loose nuts. The shock absorber, properly mined secured top and bottom with no signs of leaks. The airbag is properly mined secured top and bottom with no signs of dry rot or any signs of leaks. When we move to the wheel assembly, we have 2 wheels back here instead of 1. So we're going to check the inner, outer sidewalls. No abrasion, bulges, or cuts. No signs of damage. The tires are beaded properly to the rim. We've got 2 32nds tread depth, even tread wear, no mismatched tires. We're going to make sure that we've got 2 inches of space between the tires. The rims are butted together properly, and there's nothing lodged in between the tires. We're going to check our lug nuts to make sure that they're all properly mined secured. No signs of looseness, shiny threads, or rust trails. Our axle seal is properly mined secured. No loose nuts, no signs of leaks. My valve stems are properly mined secured with no damage. The caps are in place. The The valve stem should be the indicator to check the tire pressure in the tire. The tire pressure should be inflated to the manufacturer's recommendation on the tire. The inner, outer, and outer rims, there's no signs of damage to the rims, no illegal welds. The fifth wheel area, we're going to check the apron to make sure that there's no signs of damage to the apron. That's the big metal plate on the front of the trailer that sits on top of the fifth wheel. We're going to make sure that there's no gap between the top of the fifth wheel and the apron. We're going to make sure that the fifth wheel slide plate is properly greased. We're going to make sure that the release handle is in the lock position. The fifth wheel platform is properly mounted, secured. It's not damaged in any way. All of our mounting bolts are properly mounted and secured with none missing. We're going to come underneath the back of the tractor and underneath the trailer, and we're going to inspect to make sure that our kingpin is properly mounted, secured, and there's no signs of damage to the kingpin, and that our locking jaws are properly locked around the shank of the kingpin and not around the head. While we're under the cab, or under the trailer behind the cab, we're going to check our mud flaps to make sure they're properly mounted, secured, not damaged, not missing any nuts or bolts, that our DOT reflective tape is clean and visible on the back of the tractor. We're going to check our brake lights, parking lights, turn signals, four-way flashers. They're red in color, they're not cracked or broken. Our reverse lights are white in color, they're not cracked or broken. We're going to swing around while we're underneath the trailer, and we're going to check all our trailer frame rails all the way down the entire length of the trailer to make sure no trailer frame rails are cracked or broken, no signs of damage to the undercarriage of the trailer. We're also going to check our landing gear. Make sure that the landing gear is properly mounted and secured. There's no signs of damage. It's not missing any nuts or bolts. Our landing gear feet are completely raised, and there's no signs of debris on the feet that could fly off and hit a car going down the road. We're going to check our landing gear crank handle to make sure it's in the stowed position and that it operates properly. Since we finished with the outside of the cab, it's time to move on to the trailer. So we're going to come back to the headboard. We're going to start at the top. Make sure that our clearance lights are orange in color. They're not cracked or broken. They're properly mounted, secured. There's no signs of fresh damage to the headboard of the trailer. The trailer's not compromised. Our DOT tape is clean and present on the front of the trailer. We're going to look down the entire length of the trailer, make sure there's no fresh damage to the side of the trailer. We've got DOT tape that is clean and present down the entire length of the trailer. The rivets on the bottom of the trailer, we're not missing any rivets. These rivets are critical to the stability of the trailer. If any of these rivets are sheared off or broken, the floor of the trailer is now compromised. Those rivets need to be taken care of immediately. These are your frame rail rivets. These are the rivets that hold the frame rails of the trailer. If any of these are damaged, missing, or sheared off, then the floor of the trailer is now compromised. We need to have those taken care of immediately. As we move on down the side of the trailer, we come to a turn signal four-way flasher. It's orange in color, it's properly mounted, secured, it's not cracked or broken. We move on back to the back of the trailer. Okay, so here we are at the back tandems. First thing we're going to check our tandem slide rail. Make sure it's properly mounted, secured, it's not damaged. Check our locking pins, make sure they're in the lock position. Our release handle is in the lock position. As we talked about earlier, on every axle, there's three systems that have to be inspected: the brake system, suspension system, and the wheel and tire assembly. So here we're going to inspect the brake system. We're going to start with our air lines. They're properly mounted, secured, no abrasion, bulges, cuts, no signs of leaks. Our brake chambers, no signs of damage, not missing any nuts or bolts. Our slack adjuster and push rod on the back of the brake chamber, no signs of damage, not missing any pins or keys, no more than 1 inch free travel. Here we can see the brake drum. They're not covered with dust covers. So our brake pad is a 1/4 inch thick. It's square on the edges, not rounded. It's not cracked or broken. Our brake drum no signs of damage, no illegal welds, no oil or grease in the brake drum. My suspension system, same parts, different look. My control arm mount is properly mounted and secured, not damaged, not missing any nuts or bolts. My control arm, not bent or twisted, no signs of damage. My U-bolts are properly mounted and secured, not missing any nuts or bolts. My shock absorber, properly mounted and secured, top and bottom, no signs of leaks. Behind that shock absorber is an airbag, no signs of abrasion, bulges, cuts, no dry rot, properly mounted, secured, top and bottom, no signs of leaks. Our rear tandem wheel and tire assemblies, same as the previous axle. We're going to check our inner, outer sidewalls, no abrasion, bulges, cuts, no damage. The rims are beaded together properly. Inner, outer rims, no damage to the rims, no illegal welds. We've got 2 32 tread depth, even tread wear, no mismatched tires, 2 inches of space between the tires, and the rims are butted together properly. Nothing lodged in between the tires. Lug nuts are all present and accounted for. No shiny threads, no rust trails. My hub seal is properly mounted and secured, no missing nuts or bolts. Filled to the proper level, no signs of leaks. My valve stems, not damaged, cap is in place, should be the indicator. Valve stem should be the indicator to check the pressure in the tire. Pressure should be inflated to the manufacturer's recommendation on the side of the tire. Okay, as you move on back, we're going to check our door hanger to make sure it's present, properly mounted and secured. We're going to check our mud flap, make sure it's properly mounted and secured, no missing nuts or bolts, no damage. We're going to check our rear clearance light to make sure it's red in color, not cracked or broken, properly mounted and secured. At the back of the trailer, we're going to start at the top. We're going to make sure our doors are latched properly at the top. We're going to make sure that our DOT tape is clean and present. We're checking all our hinges down the side of both doors to make sure they're properly mounted and secured, no missing nuts or bolts. We're coming across to make sure that our door latches are in the lock position. The doors are latched properly at the bottom. Our door chains are present and at least 3 inches long. We've got DOT tape across the rear of the trailer. My ID lights are red in color, not cracked or broken, properly mounted and secured. My outside light is a turn signal parking light, red in color, not cracked or broken, properly mounted and secured. My inside light is a parking light, brake light, red in color, not cracked or broken, properly mounted and secured. My DOT bumper is properly mounted and secured with no signs of damage. My tag light is white in color and visible up to 25 feet. Okay, we finished the outside of the inspection. Now I've moved into the in-cab and we're going to do the in-cab inspection. So before the examiner gets in the truck with you, he's going to ask you to do a light check. And when you get in the truck, we're going to turn the lights on. In this truck, we're going to turn the key on, one switch, turn the dash on, and then turn the headlights on. Turn the key on, make sure we have power to the dash. We're going to turn the headlights on, and the examiner is going to be behind us, and we're going to be watching him in this mirror. So when we turn the lights on, we're going to ask him parking lights. He's going to give us a thumbs up. We're going to put our foot on the brake pedal and yell brake lights. He's going to give us a thumbs up. Then we're going to give him a left turn signal, a right turn signal, and our four-way flashers. At the end of each one of those items, he'll give you a thumbs up, and then he'll move to the front of the truck. At the front of the truck, we're going to ask him the same things. Parking lights. That's going to encompass your clearance lights, identification lights, and your pet lights. He's going to give you a thumbs up. We're going to ask him about the low beams of the headlights. He's going to give us a thumbs up on the low beams. Then we're going to ask him about the high beams. We're going to reach over just like in a car and use our turn signal lever left turn on the high beams. We're going to ask him about the high beams. He's going to give us a thumbs up. Then we're going to give him a left turn signal, a right turn signal, and our four-way flashers. After we've done our light check and the examiner gets in the truck with us, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put on our seat belt. And as we're putting our seat belt on, we're going to examine that seat belt to make sure it's properly mine secured, it's not cut or frayed, and that it latches and unlatches properly. Then we're going to perform a safe start. And a safe start means that we're going to push the clutch into the floor, make sure the truck's in neutral, and start our engine. So, clutch pedal to the floor, truck's in neutral, we're going to crank our engine. Once we've got our engine cranked, we need to check some gauges on the dash. The first gauge we need to check is our oil pressure gauge to make sure it rises between 30 and 60 within 5 seconds of starting the truck. We're going to check our coolant level. The coolant temperature should rise as the truck warms up. We're going to pull up our voltmeter on the dash, make sure that the voltmeter is reading between 13 and 14. We're going to check our air pressure gauges to make sure that the air pressure is building air as the truck runs as they should. Alright. As we're letting the truck warm up, we're going to do a visual inspection. We're going to check our driver's side mirror to make sure it's properly adjusted for us. We've already checked on the outside that it's properly mine secured and not cracked or broken, so all we need to do now is make sure that it's properly adjusted. We're going to check our windshield to make sure it's clean, no illegal cracks, nothing to obstruct our view. We're going to check the rubber seal around the inside of the windshield to make sure there's no signs of leaks or abrasion, bulges, or cuts. We're going to check our windshield wipers to make sure we've got rubber to glass and not metal to glass. And then we're going to check our passenger side mirror to make sure it's properly adjusted. From that point, we're going to come back across the dash and we're going to start our light indicator. We're going to check our four-way indicators to make sure that they work. We're going to check our left signal to make sure it works, our right signal to make sure it works, and our high beam indicator to make sure it works. Then we're going to come to the steering wheel and we're going to check the city horn and the road horn. The road horn will work when the air pressure gets up to 100 psi. We'll check that again in just a second. We're going to come on across to our windshield wipers and make sure that our windshield wipers work and that our washer fluid works. We're going to come to our heat and defrost. We're going to turn it to defrost, turn the fan on, make sure that there's air moving on the dash. We're going to turn it to heat, make sure that there's air moving on the floor. Okay, so we've concluded what's required on the CDL exam for the in-cab inspection. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is a series of brake tests. We're going to do a parking brake test, a service brake test, and a leaks, alarm, and button test. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is make sure that our air pressure is built up to normal operating pressure, which is 120 to 125. So if you're at this point and you're waiting on your air pressure to build up, it's perfectly acceptable to bring your RPMs up to 11 or 1200 and just hold them while we build up the air pressure. As you can see, our air pressure gauges are just now about 80 psi, so we need to build that air pressure up a little more, but we should have enough air in the system now that our road horn now works. So right now we're just waiting on the air pressure to build up, and as soon as our air pressure gets to 120, 125 psi, we'll go ahead and do our brake test. Alright, so we've got our air pressure built up now. It's about 125, 130. We're going to move into our brake test portion. The first thing we're going to do is check our parking brakes. So before we start the brake test, I'm going to put the truck in first gear. and I'm going to leave it there until the duration of the test. That means you're going to have to sit here and hold that clutch pedal in. So for the parking brakes, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check the parking brake on the trailer. I'm going to release the tractor brake and nice and easy let the clutch out until I feel it tug forward. The truck shouldn't roll. As soon as I feel that tug, I'm going to reverse that process. I'm going to set my tractor brake, release my trailer brakes, and now I'm going to check my tractor. Alright, parking brakes are good. So the next thing we're going to move into is the service brakes. At this point, we're going to push both buttons in. And once I've pushed both of those buttons in, I'm not pulling them back out again. I'm going to leave them pushed in for the duration of the test. Now, with both buttons pushed in and the truck in first gear, I'm going to ease out on the clutch, roll forward about 5 miles an hour, push the clutch back in and hit the brakes. The truck should stop, it shouldn't pull left or right, and it shouldn't make any unusual noises. Alright, so our parking brake and service brake is now complete. Let's move on to the leaks, alarms, and buttons. So here's our setup. The setup is we're already in first gear. We've already got both buttons pushed in. At this point in time, I'm going to turn the truck off, release the clutch. Now I'm locked in first gear on flat ground. I'm turning the key back on one click until I have power to the dash. I'm going to check the vehicle for leaks. I'm going to tell the examiner I'm going to apply 90 pounds of pressure for 1 minute. In 1 minute's time, I shouldn't lose any more than 4 psi. So I apply 90 pounds of pressure. My minute's up. And the next thing, we've got to make sure our warning lights come on at or before 60. So we're going to fan the brakes down till our warning lights come on at or before 60. My warning lights are on. Now I need to make sure that both of my buttons pop out between 40 and 20. So we continue to fan the brakes down, and we're going to fan the brakes until we run out of air or both buttons pop out. Alright, both buttons have popped out. We've completed our pre-trip inspection. We're going to turn the ignition off, and we're done. So I hope this pre-trip inspection helps you get through what some people would consider a difficult thing. It's broke down as simply as it can be broke down. There's no need to add anything to it. There's no need to complicate what we're trying to look for. We're just making sure that everything on the truck is there, is functional, there's no signs of damage to it, and this vehicle's safe to go down the road. If you have any questions about the pre-trip inspection, don't hesitate to ask an examiner or an instructor to clarify any questions that you may have. If there's anything else that I can do for you, feel free to ask. I'm in and out of the school most every day, and if I can do anything to help you, all you have to do is ask. Thanks a lot.